like to tell folks, I think when they're driving through the Columbia River Gorge and they see, this lonely barge tow out in the river, it doesn't look like it's holding that much cargo. But one 4-barge tow for our river system holds about the same amount of cargo as 538 semi-trucks or 1.5 unit trains. So that's a lot of product that would otherwise be going on our roads and our rails.
Welcome back to DAM, the official podcast of Northwest Hydropower. I'm your host, Austin Rohr, and I manage all things communications here at Northwest RiverPartners. As the likely title of this podcast states, the show must go on. Our work at this organization never really ends, and we want to keep following the path we've been on to see to it that hydropower is supported and recognized as the cornerstone of clean energy in the Northwest. That's why today, I'm very excited for the DAM audience to get to hear from our interim executive director, Heather Stebbings. She has been a longtime friend to RiverPartners thanks to her work at the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association, and she understands the challenges in work as well as anyone. You'll get to hear all about that in a minute, but it's also her second official day on the job, so welcome to Northwest RiverPartners and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Austin. Appreciate being here.
Our usual approach here would be like to start off with talking about, kind of what your role is and what you do, and also kind of getting into the organization you're at. But I think we've already kind of covered that ground. So instead, maybe we can kick off with maybe your background and how you found yourself in the interim role that you're at now.
Sure. So I've actually been working with RiverPartners for a really long time. So I started back in 2006 at the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association. I started doing communications. And so even back then, I'm just thinking about this now, but I served on the RiverPartners Communications Committee for quite some time. I was at PNWA through 2019. And kind of worked my way up in the organization, and I was the government relations director for the last 5 years. So really handling and leading a lot of the advocacy work that the organization was doing. And for those that aren't familiar with PNWA, it's a trade association similar to RiverPartners, but they really focus on maritime and navigation work and making sure the Corps of Engineers has enough funding and that the policies are in place to make sure we can operate and maintain our waterways here in the Northwest. And of course, the intersection there is with the dams on the Columbia and Snake Rivers. So after I was at PNWA, I went and worked at the Port of Vancouver, USA, doing communications work there. Then I handled government affairs for Shaver Transportation, one of the tug and barge lines that utilizes the river system. And then the last couple of years, I was the executive director of PNWA. And so a big portion of the work that I did at PNWA over the last couple of years was focused on the Lower Snake River dams and the mediation. So PNWA is also engaged in the litigation portion of the Columbia River system operations. So that's how I ended up here.
Absolutely, and we will talk a little bit more about that as much as we can later on. But, getting to know a little bit more about you as well, how did you kind of first get introduced to this work, maybe going back to like 2006? Or, was there something about it that caught your interest in it?
I just got lucky, actually. So in college, I studied math, so something totally different than communications and government affairs. But after college, I moved out to the Northwest from Connecticut, and I got a couple of lower level communications jobs, and I really enjoyed doing that. I moved back to Maine, Portland, of Portland. And I worked at a television station there, so got a bit more immersed in the communications world. And when I moved back out to Portland, Oregon, I found myself applying for the PNWA job. And I was really lucky. I had no maritime experience at the time. And I was really lucky I had a boss that just really, I was young and motivated, and he really took that and kind of ran with it. He let me participate in all of his meetings and really took me under his wing and kind of showed me the world of nonprofits, but also government affairs and maritime work. So it just became something I was really interested in, and over the last almost 20 years. It's just evolved even further.
Absolutely. I actually, so this year for the first time ever, I went on a vacation this summer to Maine.
You did?
I did, and I went up to I can't even think of the name of it now. It was like, I think Phippsburg or something like that.
Okay.
It's just a little tiny town on like one of those peninsulas. But it was probably about a half hour northeast of Portland. And I mean, there's definitely some similarities between here in the Northwest, or I mean, there in the Northwest, really. But I'd imagine, like, especially when it comes to some of the river transportation stuff and whatnot, I mean, there's also a lot of differences for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there's just coastal, obviously, navigation there, huge cruising industry and
Mm-hmm.
huge fishing community. And out here we have all the inland transportation, which is something that I've gotten really sort of immersed in and interested in, just in terms of all of the different pieces that are involved in making sure that we can get our goods to and from market, from all the way inland to the global marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's unique. Obviously, it's one of the things that we kind of tout, and actually, that's something that I wanted to get into as well. So last summer, we both spoke at the U.S. Wheat Summer Board meeting, and I ended up learning like a ton from your presentation because you presented before me, and I've brought that up like several times now since then. One of the more interesting facts was around the transport of agricultural goods out of, say, the Midwest that come all the way into our own inland ports just because of our unique inland transportation and barging system. And I brought a little bit of this up with Scott Corbett at the Port of Lewiston when I did the podcast with him. But maybe you could like kind of touch on some of that stuff as well and tell me more about that.
Sure. We have a really integrated transportation network on the Columbia Snake River system. So we are really lucky that we have, really good highway networks. We have really good rail networks that bring our goods out here, but then we also have the combination of inland barging transportation and deep water ports. So we, for barging purposes, we have about 365 miles worth of barge network, 14 foot deep for the barges to be able to get up there. They go through all 8 navigation locks from the Portland, Vancouver area all the way up to Lewiston, Idaho. And a lot of the barged product is, at least coming downriver for out to the global market, is Oregon, Washington, and Idaho wheat. That's primarily what we're moving. And when it makes its way down to the lower Columbia, it's loaded on really deep draft vessels and then shipped to the global marketplace. So we also have rail that comes down to the lower river, so they work together, really. It's completely integrated. And so the rail network can reach as far as the Midwest, and it kind of supplements what we can bring down on barge.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think maybe sometimes people, I wouldn't say that they misunderstand or confuse or anything like that, but it's sort of similar in the way that when we try and talk about maybe the differences between wind and solar, those intermittent resources, and then hydropower, we're not saying that wind and solar are bad. We're just talking about some of the comparisons, the drawbacks, where they're similar, where they're different. And I think that the thing that sometimes happens with like the rail situation is we tout the benefits of the river transportation and the barging so much, but that's not to say that the rail cars and the semi trucks and all that are bad, right?
No, we need all of the modes working together. So, the rail network is extremely important. It's how our goods get from the central U.S. out to the coast to be able to move out from our country. So, what happens is it is a really tricky subject because we're not saying one is better than the other. We're saying we need all of them. Yeah. They work together. They complement each other in terms of the amount that can move. So, rail doesn't have all of the capacity that we need to move all the product that we move on our inland transportation system. And in terms of complementing, it also takes multiple modes to keep our costs low. Because if you only have one way to move cargo, then you're held captive by that way to move cargo. They can charge whatever they want and almost make us uncompetitive in terms of how we move our goods. So we need barging there, just like we need rail there to be able to sort of keep the market in check.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense, and I think again, it's so similar to the energy resource model or comparison, because it's like you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, certainly, and that's whether that's the resource or whether that's where you're getting the resource from, right? I mean, we don't all want to have just one big utility that gives us all of our energy here in the Northwest.
And we've seen that with rail too, where rail is really the big guy, right? It's an extremely large network that we have in the U.S. and we had some really big challenges over the last couple of years with the capacity on the rail system, but also with the availability of rail cars. It just wasn't there to meet the needs that our farmers and others relied upon. And so it creates this system where, okay, if one thing's not working as we need it to, then we have something else to fall back on.
Absolutely. And I think, again, as we often talk about, it always comes back to kind of the Lower Snake River Dam issue. And it's like, it really speaks to how vital that aspect of their services is, right? I mean, there's obviously the energy, there's a multitude of services they provide, but that transportation piece is a big one, and it's a really hard one to work around as far as like, what do you do as an alternative?
Exactly. I always like to tell folks, I think when they're driving through the Columbia River Gorge and they see, this lonely barge tow out in the river, it doesn't look like it's holding that much cargo. But one 4-barge tow for our river system holds about the same amount of cargo as 538 semi-trucks or 1.5 unit trains. So that's a lot of product that would otherwise be going on our roads and our rails. And then we think about barging and we think, okay, this is the most environmentally friendly way to move cargo. It has the lowest amount of emissions. And so not only would you be putting that cargo on our roads and our rails, having that congestion, but you'd also have the increased emissions related to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, if people are maybe having a hard time visualizing the additional congestion or the emissions piece of it or whatever, the one I always like to go back to is just drive some of those roads out there and, think about the condition of them and then consider the astronomical increase in traffic of heavy trucks and what that might do to the condition of those roads. And then, obviously that means more construction, which means more traffic, more delays. So, I mean, whenever it's like trying to think about it in real world terms, like I think we can all universally agree that, potholes and orange cones are not our favorite thing.
No, exactly. And a lot of the roads that we have in place now, especially out in eastern Washington, where when we're thinking about what would happen if the dams were breached and we had to replace some of that transportation, they're country roads. They don't have the capability to handle the immense amount of traffic that we would need to really get our goods to market in an efficient manner.
Absolutely. So thinking about, kind of in terms of the time that you've had with this issue, how has the work around that Lower Snake River Dam and kind of the whole breaching topic evolved and changed during that time?
I think it's sort of twofold. I think that the chatter sort of around the Snake River dams has certainly gotten bigger in the Northwest. We hear about it a lot more. We heard about it related to the Orca, or there are all these other venues where it seems to be being brought into the discussion. But I would say that's where I've seen the change. It's gotten a little bit louder here in the Northwest. But to me, when it comes to the Lower Snake River dams, the conversation that really matters is the conversation with Congress. And that hasn't changed. So for me, when I'm going back and forth to DC and I'm talking to folks back there, our members of Congress and the U.S. Congress as a whole really see the value of our hydropower system, our navigation, our inland navigation system, the irrigation benefits that are provided, and they continue to support that transportation and just the Columbia River Systems Operation Network. So for me, there are things that have changed in terms of the loudness of what we're hearing out here in the region, but where the decisions matter in Congress, I really haven't seen a lot of change.
That brings up a really interesting question that comes to mind. When it comes to addressing Congress about the issue, there's the Northwest representatives, right? The people that would certainly be familiar with the issues in their own backyard. But what are some of the ways that you find you can kind of successfully communicate this stuff to Congress people from outside of our area who might not be familiar with the dams or the transportation or even just the Northwest as a whole, right? Maybe they haven't really been out here.
Right. For the transportation piece, we really talk about the value that it provides to our inland farmers and to the folks that are growing food out there, to the folks that need to get their goods to market in an efficient manner, and the economic value that provides. For the hydroelectric portion of that, we really focus on the fact that we have the ability to respond really quickly with our hydro system. We have low cost, efficient power here in the Northwest, no zero emissions related to that. So I think people really understand the value that hydropower provides. We see that across the board. I think where it gets a little bit where folks have questions sometimes is with regard to the fish, of course. And then we talk about the value of, we see the needs to always be doing better by the fish. We want to provide more funding. We want to be doing habitat improvements. We want to be doing predatory work. We want to do all the things that we can to benefit our fish, but we're making significant investments in the system to make sure that our juveniles more and more can get out through the river system and that we have increased returns coming back. And when folks around the world come to, our docks and our dams here on the Columbia Snake, they look at it and they're like, whoa, this is state-of-the-art fish facilities. You're investing millions of dollars in these. How can we replicate this elsewhere? I mean, we see fish passage being added even here in our region. Look at Howard Hansen Dam. Millions and millions of dollars are being invested by the federal government to increase fish passage at that project. And so folks see the value in investing in the fish side as well.
I think that's one of the bigger, if not one of the biggest misconceptions about our work and what we do is that they see, all of the sort of the pro-hydro organizations as being somehow anti-fish. And, whether you're talking about the work, the advocacy, the searching for that funding and those opportunities, or even just the original name of this organization being like the smart, I don't remember all the words, the Coalition for Smart Salmon Recovery, I think is what it was. The salmon issue really is a big portion of what we do as well. And, even recently with RiverPartners, we've gotten on board and trying to partner with the Upper Columbia United tribes on reintroduction above Chief Joe and Grand Coulee, which is another, huge opportunity to get salmon up there and, really hopefully establish a strong run of fish out of that region for, decades to come. But yeah, people so often are like, you guys hate the fish. And it's like, no, I love the fish. Not even as a, person in this role at this organization, but just as a person in general. Like, my interest in this really came from my enthusiasm about salmon naturally and kind of wanting to understand more what the challenges are and, where there's kind of more myth and where there's more fact as far as where we can most effectively help the species with recovery and having a sustainable population.
I think you're totally right. I think for people outside of the issue, it feels really black and white, but it's a really nuanced issue. And what I always try to help folks understand is that we live here, we work here, we have our families here, and the communities in the Northwest. We recognize the cultural significance of salmon. We want there to be more salmon here in the region, and we want to be a partner in making that happen. One of our sort of irrigator friends, I heard him once say, we're farmers. We're not anti-fish. We're not anti-environment. We need clean water. We need clean soil. We need the same things, in some capacity that the fish need to survive. So we want to keep doing better too, and we're looking for those areas where we can partner with others to make that happen. For me, especially when I was at the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association, I would always say we support pretty much every aspect of fish recovery except for breaching the lower Snake River dams. We don't feel like that makes sense. But we're certainly coming to the table to say, where can we lend our voice? Where can we advocate for money? Where can we, link arms and bring resources back to the Northwest so that we can do better for the salmon and for the communities that rely upon them.
Certainly. And, the thing is, too, I mean, the whole concept of, can the dams coexist with salmon, especially the lower Snake River dams, when it comes to the work that we do, so much of it is being informed by the people who actually really study those fish. And so, I think just for example here, we have an entire biology committee, right? And a lot of them are fish biologists from different utilities around the region, or, in some way or another, they're involved in kind of the ongoing efforts with habitat, hatcheries, and so on. Those people, they certainly care about the fish, right? I mean, I think most of them probably are people who they're passionate about biology, they're passionate about the species. A lot of them are passionate about fishing, right? So they're, not coming from this maybe anti-recreation background or anything like that, where, they'd be at odds with the other people that love to go fishing in any capacity. I mean, they really believe in what they do, and they have studied it extensively enough to feel confident in saying that they don't see dam breaching as a necessary action, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've heard some of the utility folks talk about some of the really good news stories and the good stories that they've invested money and time on the ground, and the increases in fish runs that they've seen just at some of their own individual projects. And then partnering with some of the federal agencies like the Corps of Engineers who, operate and maintain the dams. If you listen to their biologists talk about their projects, they're proud of what they do. They believe in the work that they're doing. They believe in the fish passage facilities that they have and the improvements that they're working to, continuing to work to make. So it's really inspiring to talk to people like that. Not just because they do feel maybe the same as we do about fish and dams can coexist, but they're doing something they really believe in and they feel really passionate about. And it's always nice to talk to people that are doing those sorts of things that they feel proud about.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the more interesting kind of anecdotes I'll share is when I had my previous job before this one, and I was working in a magazine doing, totally different work. But one of the questions that I remember being asked during the interview process was, do you have kind of thick skin, right? Can you handle, basically the question was if you're going to be interviewing, say one of these top level athletes and they, they're not nice to you or they blow you off or whatever, can you handle that, or are you going to take that personally? I was like, no, I can handle that. And for the most part, I really never did have a problem. There are times where you kind of, bump up against people the wrong way or whatever, right? And they're not super excited about talking to you. And you just kind of go, hey, whatever, it is what it is. Right. It's all professional stuff. I would say similarly, being in this current role, when it comes to communicating and seeing the activity on our social media, um, initially, we would get a lot of comments and different things where I'd be like, I don't really care, right? Like I might disagree with this person, but
Yeah.
it is what it is. And now, having been here for a few years, I find more that I have to kind of pull myself back because I'm like, reading some of this stuff where people say fish ladders don't work, hatcheries don't work, these things are bad, and all that. And I'm like, I've worked with all the people who have put so much of their livelihood behind designing, making sure that these things do work. And I'm like, it's not only just kind of like a disagreement, but I'm like, it's kind of insulting to
Right.
the people who really, have put in all that hard work and done something that I think is successful. And you're kind of spreading like this, misinformation that
Yeah.
really throws their work under the bus.
Yeah.
So I have to be like very controlled and like thinking about like, okay, it's fine, like it's not a big deal, but
Yeah, try not to take it personally, but at the same time, it's definitely frustrating when
Yeah.
you hear kind of lies being thrown around.
Mhm.
And a few years ago, I was speaking at a conference, and there were a bunch of Corps of Engineers people there, and there was a woman that was really involved in the development of the CRSO EIS, and I was talking to her about some of the issues we were working on related to it, and she was like, it's just really disheartening for people to be against that product. Like, we put our heart and soul into that. We believed in the work that we were doing, and we believe in the outcome that happened, and it's just being ripped apart,
Yeah.
And so I try to think about that, like put myself in the position of others. I try to do that even with the folks that don't necessarily agree with us on a lot of things. Where are they coming from? And we're all people. We all believe in something, and to just try to have some empathy for each other. I feel like social media is a real
Yeah, it's
it's really
tough.
bad for that. And there's just a lot of sort of trolls, and people just kind of feel like they can put whatever they want to put out there without any consideration for other folks. So I try to really lead with kindness. But you're right, it's hard not to take things personally sometimes, and it's also hard not to get worked up when you see, lies being spread.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's not a challenge that's necessarily unique to our work, certainly. But as you said, it's like, if we're gonna get anywhere with the challenges that we're up against, and that's all of the challenges, right? That's the salmon and the energy issues and continuing to offer good transportation to the region. Like all of these things require us to be able to work together. And when there's a lack of empathy and that there's accusations being thrown around and different things, it's like it really doesn't help with the process. So
No, we're all trying, for the most part. I feel like people are inherently good. We're all trying to do good work. We may come from different corners on things, but we are all trying to get to the same end result for the most part. We're trying to get more salmon out here. We're trying to reduce our greenhouse gases. We're trying to invest in our, transportation equipment so we can be cleaner and greener. We're all trying to get to a good place.
Yeah, definitely. On that note, too, of, kind of working closely together, PNWA and RiverPartners have always traditionally worked very closely together. As far as some of that overlap goes, there's a lot that we have in terms of membership, support for agricultural communities, river transportation, be that, cruising or barging, really. But coming from that background, are there things you're excited to engage in more with the public power aspect of being at this organization?
I am. Public power is a little bit of an enigma to me sometimes because it's really complex.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding the the transmission network better, understanding the relationships with BPA and DOE in more depth, understanding the relationships with tribal partners and the Fish and Wildlife Program. So those are all things I'm really looking forward to kind of dive into, because I followed them peripherally and I understand them at some level, but I'd really like to get a bit more in the weeds.
Yeah, there is a ton of diversity within it. Just looking at our list of members and thinking about not only where they are, who they are, the communities that they're serving, but then also understanding the relationships between all of them. And as you mentioned, there's the relationships with outside entities, outside stakeholders, even tying back to sort of that agricultural side of it. It's like, some of our members are hugely connected to the farms, right? And so, there's questions about, hey, this is, the energy situation during a heat wave, and we need to be in touch with all of our farmers to make sure they understand the situation we're in and what they might be, having to prepare for if something were to go sideways. I mean, there's a lot of interconnectedness with all of it. Obviously, I mean, it makes sense, right? The energy is kind of tied into all of our lives in some way or another every day. But yeah,
but you don't always think about it because you're just so used to flipping the switch and the lights go on. So that interconnectedness is kind of one of the things I'm most interested in understanding a bit better.
Definitely. I was just having a conversation with a good friend recently who was, long story short, he is not a public power customer, and he got a rate increase notification in the mail. And so he was kind of a little bit worked up, like, really, this, they're raising it this much and all that. And then he starts kind of asking me about how this stuff works because of the work that I do here. And so we start talking about it and, explaining to him, kind of the high level, like, way that all of the different things work to make sure that the lights come on when you flip the switch. And he's like, so all this stuff is going on, like, all the time, like, in the background, and I'm like, oh yeah. There's always somebody with their kind of finger on the pulse to make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, it's very similar to what I'm used to, which is the transportation network.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even think about how you buy your television at the grocery store, or at Fred Meyer or Target. How your goods are getting here. You just go to the store and you buy it, and then you go home and use it. It's really similar to that aspect of a utility world where you just flip the switch and it's on. You don't really have to think about how it got there.
It's pretty crazy to think about. Like, for example, the television, probably the amount of, if you were to, like, take apart all the components of it, like the amount of different places in the world that all that stuff has come from and then been assembled in some way, then moved to another place to be further assembled. Like, by the time it ends up in your living room, like your TV's been around the globe pretty much.
Exactly. For sure.
So, I guess more broadly speaking, what are some of the challenges and opportunities of being in the executive director position at this type of organization that people might not be aware of?
That's a good question. I think leading an organization is a really important role. My role here is a little bit different because I'm interim, so it's just for a few months. But I think I look at my role over the next several months as just providing that consistency for RiverPartners. I'm definitely a little bit different than Kurt. Well, obviously I'm different than Kurt, but a little bit different in my area of focus. But we've both been working, day in, day out on this mediation. And so providing not only that consistency, but consistency with the board in terms of just having had that experience in that type of leadership role before. So I look at my role a little different than I look at like a long-term executive director, where you're really setting the vision for the association. You're thinking about strategy today, but also 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, and maintaining your membership, growing your membership, and making sure that RiverPartners continues to have a strong voice in the region. So I look at those as sort of two different roles. Mine's sort of the short-term gig, and so I can focus on really providing that consistency while the board can focus on finding the next leader for Northwest RiverPartners.
So let me ask as well, like when you describe sort of setting a vision and coming up with different strategies for leading an organization, some people might hear that and say like, okay, so let's say the goal here is to increase awareness about hydropower. You would go like, okay, what do you do with that, right? Or like, what do you mean by that? So as far as kind of like taking more of that broad, taking a broad vision for something and then actually putting it into practice. Again, obviously talking more at a high level, like, without getting too much into specific examples, how would you describe some of the ways that you might go about doing that? Like, how does somebody kind of really accomplish that work of being strategic and driving the vision of an organization?
Yeah, I think you really do need to have a good handle on your membership, the needs of your membership, not only today, but what's coming down the pike. What are the challenges that your membership is going to face? And really keeping your finger on the pulse of those needs while you're looking for opportunities to partner, to grow, to get your message out. So it kind of shifts, I guess, year after year with different technologies and different things like that. But in terms of big picture, where you're looking to maintain your membership, provide value for your membership, and then really see, I really think the challenges piece for me is where I see the biggest area to harness some of the value, because you look at down the line, whether it's funding challenges or policy related, those are all things that take a long time to get done. So you kind of want to stay ahead of the curve on those challenges. So it's really understanding the on the ground work that's happening at your member level and bringing that kind of within to the staff level here at the association.
Yeah, I think that's a really good description, because it does sort of speak to, I think, something that we often communicate here, which is trying to say we're a member driven organization. Well, what does that really mean? And I think that definitely kind of answers what that means.
I think as associations, associations are typically, they have a smaller staff. And so I think it can get really easy. RiverPartners has been amazing at not doing this. Kurt has been really good about just developing this really big momentum for the organization, which has been awesome to watch from afar. But I think associations in general, you can be doing the work for so long, and you have a small staff, so sometimes it's hard to get really creative because you're just trying to get the day-to-day stuff done. But you can sort of get in the groove and forget to have the vision. And so really staying focused on that long-term vision, I think, is helpful for an executive director.
Yeah, absolutely. And something too that I think plays into that as well, maybe on the other side of it, is there's a lot of challenge that comes up when you are trying to focus on the longer term vision, and then there's curveballs that get thrown our way with I would say the last 3 years, at least since I've been here for 4.5 going on 5 years, but really from 2020 to 2023 going into 2024, we've had a lot of curveballs in the way of different processes, in the way of different kind of
just a lot of work thrown on a small staff. I have a friend, and the way he describes it as like how you should work is you should always have the ability to flex. So you, on a daily basis, you should have probably 75% of your workload packed. You got to do it, whatever, it could be lower, whatever you're comfortable with, but you got to have that 25% flex, because stuff comes up every day. And the last couple of years, there just hasn't been any room for flex. I'll speak for myself, but certainly watching others that are dealing with similar issues, we lost the ability to flex, so we can't be as responsive. We can't cover things as comprehensively as we would like. And for those of us that are kind of type A, it's a really hard place to be in because you either need to be working, 24 hours a day, or things just aren't going to get done like you want them to. So that's been really hard the last few years. I think that's been a huge challenge for folks that have small staffs like RiverPartners or PNWA, where you lose the ability to flex and to be responsive and adaptable.
It really is. It's a tremendous challenge, and I think that it's probably, I believe it's been shared on the podcast before, so hopefully I'm not unveiling anything new there, especially because I'm kind of speaking a little bit on Kurt's behalf. But at one point we had kind of this attitude of like, okay, if we can just get through this next thing, then we'll be in the clear. And now I think it's more of a, okay, we're going to get through this one, and then what's the next thing going to be? Because it's almost like you might get 2 months tops where there's a break, but then something new will come along. And so you have to really, as you said, maintain constant flexibility.
Yeah, I've been engaged in some capacity. It was a lot lower before, but has increased over the last several years. But since we're talking about the Snake River issues, that used to be an issue that would ebb and flow. I mean, we'd have some on years and we've had off years. And that's an issue where it's just a sustained on year. There's no off time with that issue. And so that's one where we've lost our ability to totally flex because it requires a lot of energy and focus, and rightfully so.
And so I guess one question that I do have is, as you mentioned, kind of the being in the interim role and trying to kind of maintain that consistency, help us continue moving forward, keep the momentum up while providing an opportunity for us to kind of, find that next person to be in that permanent role. Do you have any other maybe goals in mind that you're thinking of while you're going to be here?
I've thought a bit about that, and Kurt and I talked a little bit about that yesterday, trying to understand what the priorities of folks are just for the near term. I think the next few months will be really important in terms of the mediation, and so my goal is to really make sure that I'm talking with the members and board about their priorities for the mediation. So understanding that utility component better, and working with, you guys have established a really good working team here. And so leaning on those folks too to help me, but making sure we're setting a really good course so that when the next person comes in, we've set them up for success.
Yeah. And, the thing that's so challenging, to kind of touch on the mediation as well, there's obviously a large component of that at the time of recording, we still have a lot of confidentiality around it, what we can say, what we can't say. Also, as I was kind of thinking about it this morning with regards to a totally different conversation, it's like there's what you can't say, and there's also kind of what you can't say about what you can't say,
right?
Because it's like if you start talking about things that maybe aren't going on, well, that implies what may actually be going on. So
right.
There's that challenge, but then I think there's also the challenge of, I think as of where we are right now, there's still a lot of unknown in terms of kind of where we'll end up and when. There may be some of the information people could see in like our press statements and things, which are all publicly available as always, but as far as kind of where we actually see this ultimately landing, still a lot of unpredictability to navigate through there.
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest challenge that we've had and that we continue to have is that we've been pretty locked out of the process. So that's a process-oriented statement, so I think we're okay with it. But
I believe so.
we just haven't gotten a seat at the table, no matter how hard we've tried. And that's been universal for pretty much all of the defendant interveners. And so it's been frustrating. It's been sad. I mean, it's sad. Like, I know that sounds kind of silly, but it's as, even like U.S. citizens, constituents of Oregon and Washington, the process has been really disappointing.
And I don't think that we've been shy about that, whether it's been the River Partners statements that we've made or the joint statements that we've made between us, PNWA, and also PPC. Yeah, it's been a real challenge, and to think now, I guess we've been in this for almost a year and a half.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. Like that time always flies by. It feels like when it comes to the work that we do, but especially with that issue, it's sometimes hard to believe that we're still here at this point.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like when you're in it on the day to day, you're like, oh my God, I feel like we've been doing this for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And to speak to the previous point we talked about, the workload issue, it's like, okay, how long are we going to have to be at this level? But then you look back and it's been a year and a half and you're like, okay, it's kind of, now that we're here, we're like, gosh darn, we're still here, but yeah. I don't have much to say about that. It's been frustrating.
Yeah. I think the only thing I will add is, we have kind of an end date in mind at this point. Whether or not that happens, I mean, not to call into question the point in the process we're at and everything, but more or less, I think because it's been on for so long now, it's sometimes kind of hard to believe, like, is it really going to be, is that really going to be like the, definitive point at which we're done, or, where do we end up? But I think to your point, the work doesn't end at the end date of the process necessarily. And so there is a lot to do to kind of make sure that, whoever's coming in next year is going to be able to really jump into this and feel like they can, confidently approach such a challenging issue that has been going on for a year and a half.
Yeah, you're right. I feel like, we have the December 15th deadline looming, so just a few more weeks and we'll know a little bit more, but we've been in this spot before where we're like, okay, the stay ends in a couple weeks and we'll know what's happening, and then the can is kicked a little bit. So sounds like December 15th is pretty solid, but we'll see when we get closer.
Yeah, for sure. One question that I have, and I understand it's being it's your second day here, but at the same time, you do have the experience coming into this as well. Just in terms of like what you think might be helpful to the next permanent executive director here. Is there anything broadly you might say you would recommend, maybe things they could focus on or things they could bring to the table to kind of help with elevating the organization and continuing our mission forward?
Yeah, I think getting out to your members is one of the biggest things you can do as an executive director, or like a new executive director. When I was at PNWA, that was my initial goal, and then Snake River issues kind of hit, and it did get derailed a little bit. But I do think I was lucky because I had a lot of experience with them before, so I knew most of our members. But as someone coming in new, I think understanding your members, getting out to see them and their projects and the things that they're working on and the people that they work with, creating that solid foundation up front will really reap benefits down the line. So, and it will help you tell the story better. It will help you with your messaging, and the better you understand what you're working on, the better advocate and voice you can be for that issue and those people.
Well, there's going to be a lot of people for them to meet, that's for sure.
Yeah. They'll be doing it for a while.
Yeah. As far as maybe going back to, more looking at you, what do you think is next for you kind of once you're done with this interim role here? I mean, do you think you'll want to kind of stay on top of the particular Snake River Dam issue, or do you think you'll kind of broaden your horizons as far as maybe where you'll be looking at?
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit of both. It's a hard issue to leave. Like, it was a very challenging issue the last few years, but it did feel like we were such a tight knit community working on it. So I feel like I was kind of in this club, and then now in River Partners, I get to continue being in the club. But I know I'll be tracking it in some capacity. So I do have a couple of other clients that I work with, and so one of them is really engaged on this issue from the navigation and transportation side, and I imagine I'll still be in kind of this world. I did hang my own shingle, but I'm only doing that kind of in conjunction with a couple of other projects. So I'm really excited that I get to find projects that I want to work on and people that I really enjoy working with. I feel really lucky that I'm able to be like selective in what I pick out there. So I think I'll definitely be staying in the ports, maritime, water type industries.
If there's one thing I think that we could certainly say for going through a lot of the challenges of these last few years, it is that there's kind of a wealth of experience and knowledge that you gain from being in it that I think does put you in a particular position where not only is it hard to kind of not be engaged in some way because we end up working so closely with it, but there also is something to be said for kind of having that experience to bring to the table, right?
Yeah, for sure. You get a lot of experience, but how we talked about how it's kind of a nuanced issue. I think you get sort of this fire within you to want to tell the true story about things and help people understand the issue better. So yeah, it would be a hard issue for me to leave, but
yeah. Speaking kind of along those lines, and I think luckily, for you, as some of our guests don't have, you've had a little bit of fair warning that this would be coming, but
that doesn't mean I'm going to have a good day.
But we are winding down here, and so the thing I always like to ask everybody is to kind of close out the episode with a little bit of life advice, just to get to kind of understand maybe what drives you or what makes you who you are.
Yeah, I think what I've really been focusing on is a little bit what we talked about already, is kind of, being empathetic and leading with kindness. These issues get really challenging and contentious, but when you are leading in a way that you feel good about and you're treating other people with respect and kindness and trying to put yourself in their position, I think you're really able to offer a better perspective and represent your groups in a more well-rounded and thoughtful manner. And so I would just say, even if you're dealing with a challenging issue or you're having a difficult time at work, try to lead with kindness. It always seems to make the situation better.
I'm gonna ask you one bonus question on that note. Is there anything that comes to mind for you as far as maybe some strategies for if you find yourself being challenged on that, like, is there something that helps you with returning to empathy and kindness?
Yeah, I can be a little reaction. Like, I can, in my own self, I can feel my blood pressure rise just like anybody else.
Certainly.
So, going for a walk, having some deep breaths, just trying to gain perspective back on, what your end goal is, staying focused on your end goal. I used to have like a little sticker on my computer that said, keep your eye on the prize. Because it really just would, in those moments where I was really frustrated, I'd just be like, okay, this is where we're trying to get to, and maintain your composure and we can get there.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate that, and I hope for anyone listening that you can find whatever that is. Maybe it's a walk or a sticker or whatever, but yeah, it's definitely important for not only us being in the positions we're in, but also for all the people who listen to this podcast that in some way or another have an interest in hydropower, which means that they probably, at least with their friends or family, or writing letters in when we're asking people to do that kind of stuff, that they're always holding their composure and
Yeah.
being empathetic and kind about the issue, and anything else as well, obviously.
Yeah, and know that you have friends that are working on the same issues. You're not alone, and we're all trying to do good work.
Yeah, we're here for you.
Yeah.
And as people keep listening, they can find out how to get in touch with their friends as well. So,
Okay.
yeah, people always, for people that don't stick around to the very end of the episode, they're missing out on all kinds of info. So
Good
make sure to
tidbits.
do that. But on behalf of myself and I guess the River Partners staff, we're really excited to have you on board. I think a lot of our members are really excited, and yeah, we're gonna be continuing on with a really important time for this organization, for hydropower as a whole, and we're definitely in good hands. So excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Austin.
As you just heard, both Northwest RiverPartners and the Dam podcast remain in good hands. And rest assured, we're continuing full speed ahead towards our ambitious goals to advocate and educate. Now, we're very excited to have Heather on board, and while we've worked very closely with her on these issues for years now, as you heard, I hope all of you enjoyed getting to actually hear from her today. If you didn't stick around to the end of our last episode saying goodbye, or maybe you didn't listen at all, first let me just say,
Shame.
Joking aside though, thanks for listening all of the way through to the end of this one, because now I can remind you that this is our final episode of the year 2023. I already have some great guests scheduled, and we're going to be busy during this holiday season recording new episodes so that we can start right back up in January of 2024. But in the meantime, on behalf of myself and all of us here at Northwest RiverPartners, we wish you nothing but the best this Thanksgiving, and we hope that your holiday season is merry and bright. And don't forget to irritate your friends, family, and even those furry friends that you have at home that you probably talk to when you're by yourself, that everything from their turkey dinner to the light display that'd give Clark Griswold a run for his money are in fact possible thanks to the miracle of hydropower. I'm sure they're gonna appreciate it. Now, of course, when you inevitably all wind up on your phones at some point, that would be a great time to see what we're up to on social media. Follow us at NW River Partners on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, and LinkedIn. During these next few weeks, we'll actually be uploading our entire archive of podcasts to YouTube, and moving forward, new episodes will be available there as well. So if you're a little bit behind, that's a great time for you to catch up. As always, you can get in direct contact with us at nwriverpartners.org, fill out our contact form with whatever you'd like to share, and we'll happily get in touch. You can also send emails directly to info@nwriverpartners.org. Last but not least, please kindly leave us a 5-star review on your favorite listening platform, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes, which normally would arrive every other Friday, but in this case won't be back until the first week of January. Now, with that, I'm out of here, so until I talk to you again in 2024, see ya.